Welcome to Twilight Fables, where childhood tales are retold as nightmares whispered through shadow. Tonight's story, the Steadfast Tin Soldier, but in this version, he doesn't fall. He watches and waits. There was once a boy named Emile, who lived in a grand and drafty manor, nestled between a forest of whispering pines and the grey, oily sprawl of the city's edge. The boy was pale and often quiet, except when he was alone in his room, muttering to his toys. His parents, wealthy and detached, were often away at concerts, galleries, fundraisers, leaving Emile to the care of an indifferent governess who smelled of sour milk and wine. Emile's room was a vast nursery, shadowy even in daylight. Tall arched windows looked out on crooked chimneys and the skeletal trees beyond. Rows of shelves lined the walls, each crowded with dolls, wooden beasts, porcelain heads, clockwork contraptions, and armies of tin soldiers in every formation imaginable. But one soldier stood apart. He was slightly taller than the others, cast of duller tin, and bore a tiny imperfection. He had only one leg. The one-legged soldier didn't match any of the others in Emile's collection. While they were bright and polished, all red and gold and cheer, this one was worn and cold, with pitted metal like an ancient relic. His musket was rusted, his eye was a dim marble, and his mouth, though still a rigid line of stoic purpose, seemed stretched, as if it had been opened wider once. He stood in a small wooden box at the edge of a forgotten shelf, alone between a cracked mirror and a music box that no longer sang. No one remembered where he had come from. Not Emile, not the housekeeper, not even the governess, though she swore under her breath that she had heard scratching from that shelf at night. It was the first night of December when the dreams began. Emile had gone to bed with the fire still burning, its flickering glow painting strange, twitching shadows across the nursery walls. He nestled under layers of blankets, his breath fogging the cold air, listening to the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. He drifted off slowly, as children do, lulled by warmth, safety, and the illusion of guardianship. But then, a creak, a soft scraping, like something dragging itself across the wooden floor. His eyes snapped open. The fire was low, casting long, ember-red bars across the room. Toys sat in their usual stillness. The wardrobe loomed like a sentry in the corner, but something was different. The tin soldier, the one with a single leg. He was no longer in his box. He stood on the windowsill, balanced precariously on one leg, facing outward toward the forest. Emile sat up in bed, clutching the blankets. Had he moved it? Had the governess? No, that was impossible. He hadn't touched that soldier in weeks. He avoided it, not out of fear, exactly, but a strange sense of unease. He had always felt it was watching him, judging him, waiting. He crept from his bed, trembling, the wood cold under his bare feet. As he crossed the room, the wind howled outside. A distant bell tolled, not the manor's clock, but something older, farther, a church perhaps, or something beneath the earth. Emil reached the soldier and lifted it gently from the windowsill. It was colder than the glass beneath it, so cold it stung his skin. "Where were you going?" he whispered. The soldier said nothing, of course. He returned it to the box, shut the lid, and latched it. But as he turned back to bed, he heard something behind him. Not a noise exactly, but a feeling, like a breath on the nape of his neck, like a whisper caught in the crawl space of his mind. He sees. The next day, snow blanketed the trees. The governess was irritable. The firewood was damp. Emil was left alone, as usual, to entertain himself. He didn't go near the shelf, not even once. He played with his painted carousel, his wind-up birds, his wooden labyrinth. But everything felt distant, off. He kept glancing over his shoulder, expecting to see the tin soldier creeping across the floor. That night, he placed the soldier's box under a heavy stack of books. He wedged it into the corner beside the wardrobe and even whispered a prayer, one he'd read in an old storybook, something about silver crosses and holy light. It made him feel a little better, until he dreamed again. He stood in the forest, naked, snow up to his knees. The trees towered above like spears. Between them, thousands of tin soldiers stood in rows, identical, perfect, gleaming, all but one. At the front, the one-legged soldier, he was not small anymore. He stood 10 feet tall, arms outstretched. His rusted musket melted into his body like a third limb. His single foot was a spike driven into the earth. His mouth, once a stern line, had opened impossibly wide. From that black maw came a sound like children weeping, thousands of them, some in pain, some in rage. And Emil could not move. His limbs had become stiff, tin. He looked down and saw his fingers fusing, his knees locking. He was becoming one of them. When he awoke, he was standing upright in the middle of his room, frozen in place, mouth open, fingers curled like claws. The governess was annoyed when he told her. She accused him of sneaking about, of sleepwalking for attention. But when she followed him to the shelf, the stack of books was scattered. The box was empty. No soldier. She muttered curses under her breath, pinched his ear, and told him not to play tricks. Emil insisted he hadn't. He began to cry. "Enough," she snapped. "Maybe the rats took it." That night, Emil searched the entire nursery. He opened the toy chest. He peered beneath the bed. He moved every stuffed bear, every model cannon, every drawer in the old oak bureau. The soldier was gone. But just before midnight, the fire flickering low, he heard the scratching again, soft, metallic, from inside the walls. Tap, drag, tap, drag. By morning, he was pale and silent again, his eyes rimmed with red. The governess fed him porridge and said nothing more about the missing toy. That afternoon, the housekeeper came to clean the nursery. She was a kind, round woman with a glass eye that never quite looked where it should. Emil liked her. He asked her if she remembered the soldier, the strange one with the one leg. She froze. Her good eye locked on him. The glass one drifted toward the window. "No," she said slowly. "That one don't belong here." "What do you mean?" She licked her lips. "You leave that one alone, boy." "But it's gone," he said. "It walks." She blanched, then turned and left the room without a word. That night, Emil didn't sleep. He waited with a candle burning beside his bed, his toy sword clutched in his trembling hands. For hours, nothing moved. Then the candle flickered. The room grew colder. From the dark corner where the wardrobe stood, a figure began to form, not stepping out, not crawling, unfolding, like a puppet unravelling from the shadows, a thing made of tin and joints and silence. The soldier stood once more, but he had changed. He was taller now, child-sized. His missing leg had reformed, not with tin, but with something wrong. It was bone, blackened, charred. The musket on his shoulder had fused into his back, branching out like a spinal growth. And his face, Emil screamed, for the soldier's face had opened, not split, not shattered, opened like a flower, metal petals peeling back to reveal something raw and red inside, something with teeth, rows and rows of baby teeth, all chattering like keys on a typewriter. Emil stumbled from his bed, knocking the candle to the floor. Flames burst across the rug. The soldier moved, not with grace, with purpose. Each step echoed, a clink, a drag, a tap, the sound of inevitability. Emil reached the door, fumbling with the knob. It wouldn't open. Behind him, the fire spread, climbing the curtains. The soldier raised one arm, not to strike, to point at Emil's chest. And in that moment, the boy saw something in its eyes. Not malice, not hate, obligation. A memory surfaced, one he hadn't made himself. A small forge, screaming, molten tin poured over tiny bones. And a voice, make it love, make it last, make it never forget. Then the door burst open. The governess dragged him out, screaming as smoke filled the hall. Behind him, the room was engulfed. The fire was contained. The nursery was destroyed. The shelves, the toys, the wallpaper with its galloping horses, all gone. They found no sign of the soldier. They moved Emil to another room, gave him new toys, new firewood, new rules, but he never played again. He never smiled, and at night he heard it still, scratching in the walls, watching, waiting. Snow fell thick over the manor for days after the fire. The world outside Emil's window turned to white silence. The trees weighed down with frost. The statues in the garden crusted with ice, their faces warped and hidden behind frozen tears. Inside, the house was heavy with whispered worry. The governess walked softer now, and the housekeeper made signs with her fingers Emil didn't recognise. The word curse floated through keyholes. Possession, crafted wrong, should have been melted. Emil was moved to the east wing, to a smaller room with plain wallpaper and no toys. A narrow bed, a locked wardrobe, no shelves. The governess said it would be simpler, easier, to keep things in order, less to burn. They told him the soldier was gone, but Emil knew better. The second night in the new room, he found tin shavings beneath the floorboards, not fresh, rusted, crumbling, as if someone had been crawling, dragging themselves through the narrow crawl spaces beneath the house. He held one in his hand. It sliced his finger. The blood sank into the tin and vanished. The next day, the housekeeper didn't come. The governess claimed she was ill, but Emil overheard a maid whisper that they found her in the pantry, curled into a ball, teeth shattered, eyes scratched out. There was no sign of struggle, no forced entry, nothing missing, only a trail of small, perfect footprints in ash leading to the cellar door. That evening, Emil dreamt of the soldier again, but this time he wasn't standing among trees or snow. He was deep underground, in a room of stone, with walls that bled warmth. Tin soldiers lined the perimeter, not standing at attention now, but nailed into place, their limbs splayed, their faces twisted. Each had its mouth open, from which tiny white arms reached out, children's arms, dozens of them, grasping, waving, and in the centre of it all sat the one-legged soldier. He was sitting cross-legged on a throne made from scorched doll limbs. His face still blossomed into that hideous metal bloom. He held a tiny beating heart in his hand, no larger than a pebble. He dropped it into his mouth, chewed, swallowed. Emil woke up screaming. There were scratches on his windowsill again, but the snow outside was undisturbed. 2 nights later, the governess vanished. She had been reading in the parlour, nursing a glass of sherry, muttering to herself about the boy and that cursed thing. When they went to look for her, only the sherry remained, and her shoes. Inside one of the shoes was a note, scrawled in a trembling, unnatural hand. One by one, they go until the watcher is alone. Emil no longer ate. He no longer spoke. His parents, still absent, had left instructions that he be sent to a physician if his silence continued, but the staff refused to touch him. Some claimed to see metal flecks in his eyes. Others heard tapping sounds from inside the walls whenever they approached. One maid quit after walking past his door and hearing dozens of tiny voices whispering in unison. He remembers, he returns, he repairs. On the 5th day, Emil found the box. It was tucked beneath his bed, though he had checked there a dozen times before. The lid was still latched, the wood warped from heat. His hand shook as he reached for it. Inside lay not one, but 3 tin soldiers. The original one-legged soldier sat at the front, still cold, still rusted, but now flanked by 2 others. Their faces were different, familiar. One bore the features of the governess, the other the housekeeper. Each had mouths slightly ajar. From one, a white hair ribbon hung. From the other, a fragment of a glass eye. Emile screamed and hurled the box across the room. It struck the wall and burst open. But no soldiers fell out, only dust, and a whisper, "He forges what is lost." That night, the snow stopped falling. Emile heard the music box again, the one that hadn't worked in months. Its song was wrong, slow, mournful, dragging across broken notes like a dirge. It was coming from the wardrobe. He approached. The handle was frozen, his breath clouded before him. When he opened it, the music stopped. Inside was a corridor, not a wardrobe, not a closet. A long, narrow corridor lined with mirrors. Each mirror reflected a different version of him. Older, younger, broken, stitched, burned. Some held soldiers in their hands. Some had tin limbs. One had no eyes, only black sockets. Weeping soldier. He stepped inside. The corridor led downward. The air grew thick and metallic. He passed toys impaled on spikes of rusted wire. Dolls with twisted faces pressed against glass, mouthing silent screams. He found a door at the end, carved with runes that pulsed like veins. The door opened on its own. Inside was the forge, and the man, or rather, what had once been a man. He stood 12 feet tall, skin molten and cracked like cooling lava. His arms were long and ending in tools, a hammer, a file, a spoon with edges sharp as razors. He wore a mask of iron, shaped like a child's face. Behind him, hundreds of shelves, each with a tin soldier, each slightly different. Some wore dresses, some held small toys, some had faces Emile knew. His voice was like grinding stone. "Do you remember now?" Emile shook his head. The forge man stepped forward. "Let me show you." He touched Emile's chest, and the memories came. Another life, another body, a boy, lost, hungry, taken from the streets and brought to the forge. "You'll be perfect," the man had said, the first of many. He had melted the boy down, bone and blood and soul, mixed with tin, poured into a mould. One leg to mark him, a soldier, made to love, to obey, to watch, to last. But the boy remembered and rebelled, broke the spell, tried to destroy himself. The fire, the fall, but he didn't die. Tin doesn't rot, it waits. Emile staggered back. He clutched his head. No, I'm not him. I'm not. But the forge man shook his head. "You are what remains." He lifted something from the shelf. A new soldier. Emile's own face stared back at him, carved in cold metal. "You cannot run from what was forged in you." The forge began to burn brighter. The soldiers on the shelves turned their heads. The music box played again, this time faster. The forge man raised his hammer and Emil screamed, back in his bed, drenched in sweat. But something was different. His arms, heavy. He looked down, fingers fused, shining, cold, tin. And on his desk, the soldier stood again, now smiling. With 2 legs, morning came, pale and sterile. A weak, grey light filtered through the frost-blurred windows of the manor, settling on Emil's motionless form. He sat upright in bed, eyes open, unblinking. He hadn't moved all night, nor had the soldier. It stood on the desk again, precisely centred, perfect posture, musket resting against its shoulder, like it had never been melted, warped, or malformed. But Emil knew better. The musket was fused now, half grown from its shoulder like a limb. The face, though blank, had learned how to grin. It was smiling again, but no one else saw it. When the doctor arrived, summoned finally by a long-delayed telegram from his parents, he found Emil silent, uncooperative, and mildly catatonic. That was the phrase he used when he left his report on the foyer table. He seems convinced that he's not fully human anymore. He told the temporary butler, some kind of psychological break, hallucinations, maybe even dissociation, common in unsupervised children. The butler nodded, said nothing, and quietly removed the doctor's coat from the rack, where tin shavings were already starting to collect in the lining. Emil didn't eat, didn't speak, but he did begin to scratch at his own skin. It began with the back of his hand, where he claimed he could feel the cooling, the sensation of metal being poured beneath his flesh. His fingers would tremble, and then his nails would dig deep, as if trying to scrape something out. After the 4th time, they took away his sharp objects. After the 5th, they restrained him at night. Still, the soldier remained, always in view, sometimes on the desk, sometimes perched on the edge of his nightstand, or standing upright on the windowsill, as if surveying the snow-sick forest beyond. Each morning, it was just there. It never moved when anyone else was in the room, but Emil knew it had already become him once, and now it was waiting to become something more. He started to see things in mirrors, not visions, not reflections, replications, pieces of other rooms that didn't exist. In the vanity glass, he saw a forge with dozens of rusted tools and long, pulsing chains hanging from the rafters. In the bathroom mirror, a doll-like face stared at him with no eyes, just sockets packed with black cotton and silver powder. And when he looked in the full-length hallway mirror that hung outside his room, he no longer saw himself. He saw the soldier, not static, not posed, marching, one foot dragging, one foot clinking. Again and again, the remaining staff stopped cleaning his room. No one admitted to putting it into words, but each felt the same wrongness when they entered. The walls felt closer than they had the day before. The floor was sticky, though nothing was spilled. The firewood snapped in unnatural rhythms, like bones breaking in a specific pattern. One maid swore she saw footprints, tiny ones, climbing the wall. They all quit within the week. Only Emile was left, and the soldier. On the 7th night, he began to hear the ticking. Not the grandfather clock's usual rhythm. No, this was slower, wet, like water dripping through gears. He followed the sound to the wardrobe. Inside, beneath a floorboard, he found a compartment he'd never seen, and inside that, another soldier, crushed, mouth open. Something had tried to scream and been sealed mid-breath. Its jaw was snapped sideways. One arm had been twisted behind its back and soldered in place, and in its belly, carved into the metal, was a single word: duplicate. As he stared, the ticking grew louder from inside the walls. Not one sound now, but hundreds of tin feet marching. The army was coming. The next morning, he was gone. Not missing, just gone. The room was untouched, the sheets unslept, the fire long dead. But when the temporary butler tried to open the door, he found the keyhole filled with solder. When he peered through the gap between the hinges, he saw dozens of tin figures lined up on the floor in rows, all facing the door, all grinning. Emile was not in the house, but he was not gone. He awoke in a cavern of mirrors. It stretched for miles. Each pane was cracked, or shifting, or fluid like water. He saw his many selves, marching, clawing, weeping, screaming, some with no faces, some with too many. The soldier stood before him, towering now, nearly 7 feet tall. His back had split open like an insect's shell, revealing gears churning slowly behind ribs made of rusted keys. "Why?" Emile whispered, his voice like a child's, but too hollow. The soldier turned. "Because you left me." Emile shook his head. "No, I didn't. You let them throw me in the fire." The room rippled. Flames surged across the mirrored walls. Screams echoed. A memory burned its way to the surface. Emile, younger, crying, holding the one-legged soldier. The house ablaze. The governess screaming to drop it. He hesitated, then tossed the soldier into the fire. "I was afraid," Emile choked. "You were made to be brave." The soldier stepped forward. A long black tongue emerged from its open mouth, metallic, barbed, twitching. "So now, I'll fix you." The transformation was slow. It began in his eyes. His tears turned to droplets of mercury. Then his skin, pale grey, flaking into thin curls that revealed plate underneath. And his voice, it became a whistle, a sharp, rhythmic thing, like a command. Each time he spoke, a new soldier was born, from the walls, from the cracks in the ground, from the ashes of old toys. Their faces were warped, features half-formed, arms too long or too few, but they all had the same hunger, to serve, to obey, to replicate, the manor began to change. From the outside, it still appeared old and empty, but those who strayed too close, children lost in the forest, drunkards on winter dares, sometimes found themselves at the gates. They would see a flickering light in an upstairs window, and if they entered, they would not leave. Only echoes escaped now, and songs, warped versions of old lullabies, played on unseen instruments. Sometimes a window would open, and a single object would fall out. A pacifier, a stuffed bear, a key, a baby tooth wrapped in wire, and always, behind the curtain, a small figure would watch, motionless, balanced perfectly on one foot, grinning. The manor was empty, or so it appeared. Snow had drifted into the cracks of the stone facade, resting on the iron balconies like funeral lace. The windows were black, lifeless, and sealed tight with years of grime. Even the birds that once circled the nearby pines had long since abandoned the grounds. Silence clung to the estate like fog, but beneath the silence something moved. The hearths were still warm in rooms where no fire had burned in years. The doors creaked open to reveal halls that shifted when unobserved, growing narrower, hungrier. Paintings changed overnight. In one, the governess smiled serenely. By morning, her jaw had unhinged and her eyes wept tin. No one visited anymore, except the children. They came in dreams first. They saw a soldier standing at the edge of their beds, one-legged, watching, grinning. He never spoke, but he would raise a finger and point, always to the window, and when they looked, they'd see the manor, distant, faint, a shadow between trees, lit by a fire that never dimmed, and some would wake up already halfway there, barefoot in the snow, the moon above them, and the house looming closer with every blink. One such child was Elsie, 9 years old, small for her age, lived with her aunt after her parents had vanished the winter prior, lost on a trip that had taken them near the old estate. Elsie had never spoken a word since, until the soldier came. The first time she saw him, he was inside her dollhouse. She'd opened the tiny wooden door to find him standing in the drawing room, exactly the height of the furniture, his musket resting on the grand piano. He turned to her, tilted his head. Elsie didn't scream. She smiled. She reached for him, and the moment her fingers brushed his tin skin, a sharp jolt surged through her arm. She didn't cry. She only whispered one word, home. That night, she disappeared. Her aunt found the back door open, snow tracking across the rug, the dollhouse tipped sideways and empty. They found her footprints in the snow, leading into the forest. They never found her body, but days later, a hunter swore he saw a little girl dancing alone beneath a pine tree deep in the woods. She was barefoot, her skin pale blue with frost. She didn't shiver. She was humming, and beside her stood a soldier, one-legged. Inside the manor, Emil stood in the nursery once more, but it wasn't his nursery. The room had grown, walls stretched upward like a cathedral, lined with shelves that spiraled to the ceiling. Every shelf held toys, dolls, animals, machines, and soldiers. Thousands of them. Some were tiny, no larger than matchsticks. Others were human-sized, their faces frozen in masks of obedience. All were watching, waiting. Emil was taller now, older, barely recognisable. His limbs were longer, more mechanical in movement. His joints clicked when he turned. Where his heart once beat, there was only a slow, steady ticking. The transformation was nearly complete, but not yet. One piece remained, the last child. They brought him to the manor in a wooden cart. He was blindfolded, gagged, wrapped in wool. His name was Jacob, 6 years old, orphaned during the fire that had taken his village. A rescue, the authorities said, a ward of the state. They had sent him to the countryside, to the only estate still standing in the region. The letters had stopped shortly after. Jacob didn't speak. He simply trembled, not from fear, but from the whispers. They had started the moment the cart entered the woods. Tiny voices from inside the trees, from beneath the snow. He waits. He remembers. You were promised. Inside the manor, the rooms welcomed him. The floor creaked like a mother's lullaby. The stairs unfolded like a mouth opening wide. Jacob was placed in the nursery, though now it resembled more of a cathedral to tin. The ceiling rose into darkness. The chandelier had grown eyes. They unwrapped him slowly. No one spoke. No one breathed. The child was left alone, and the moment the door closed, he turned toward the corner. The soldier was there, waiting. Emil entered the room with a grace that was no longer human. He walked like a puppet, pulled by invisible strings, yet each movement radiated intention. He knelt beside Jacob. For a moment, there was silence. Then, from Emil's open hand, he revealed a gift, a tin heart, small and still warm. It pulsed faintly, ticking in time with the child's breath. Do you know what this is? Emil asked. Jacob stared. It's what I was missing, what we were missing. He held it closer. It's not made from metal, not entirely. Jacob finally spoke. His voice was thin, broken. What is it made from? Emil smiled. You. The ritual began. The shelves trembled. The soldiers turned in unison. Outside, the snow stopped falling. Inside, the ceiling opened. Above, an endless forge. Iron wheels spinning in the heavens, pouring silver rain across the attic beams. The heart rose from Emil's hands and hovered above Jacob's chest. He screamed, not from pain, from memory. He had seen this before, not in dreams, in another life. A workshop, a fire, a man with tools for hands. You'll be perfect, the man had said. Jacob's body stiffened. The heart descended, but then the soldier moved. The original one, one-legged, rust-pocked. He stepped forward. Emil froze. The forge above flickered, the soldiers stuttered in their formation, and the old soldier, the first one, the one who had been thrown in the fire, raised his musket. He aimed at Emil and fired. The sound wasn't like a gunshot. It was like shattering glass. Time cracked. Space bent. Emil staggered backward. His chest split open, not with blood, but steam. Gears tumbled from his ribs. Screws rained across the floor. And inside his chest, a void. Where the child had once been, he had never finished becoming, because something had been missing all along. Not the heart, the choice. Jakob stood, unaided. He walked past Emil, who knelt on the floor, steam billowing from his eyes. The heart floated between them, and Jacob reached out, not to take it, but to crush it. His fingers closed. The heart screamed, not a mechanical noise, a human one, and the forge above began to collapse. The nursery imploded, shelves buckled, soldiers fell, writhing, melting into puddles of tin and bone. The chandelier wept fire. Emil reached toward Jacob, not in anger, but sorrow. "I only wanted us to be whole," he whispered. Jacob knelt beside him. "You were never broken." And with that, the last of the soldiers dissolved. Jacob walked from the manor alone. Behind him, the estate crumbled, the snow swallowing the ruin whole. In his pocket, he carried a single item, a rusted musket. He never spoke of the soldier again, but sometimes, when he was alone in the woods, he would stop walking, turn, and raise the musket to the trees, as if watching, waiting, protecting. The manor was gone, where once stood its towering grey spires and frostbitten stone walls. Now only a depression in the snow remained, circular, wide, like the place had been scooped out of the earth. Trees bent away from it, blackened at their bases. Nothing grew there. Birds never flew over it. Even light seemed to bend oddly when it passed through the space. But Jacob remembered. He remembered the screams of tin splitting open, the sound of that false heart breaking in his hand, and the expression on Emil's face as he unravelled, not hatred, not pain, but regret. Regret as deep and endless as the sky. He had walked out of the ruin alone. He had returned to the village, but he was not the same. The villagers tried to take him in. He was just a boy, after all, pale, thin, with grey rings beneath his eyes. But strange things followed him. The fire in the blacksmith's forge burned silver when he passed. The weather vanes spun even when the wind was still. Dogs refused to go near him. Infants cried when he entered a room. The baker's daughter said she saw him speaking to his toys at night, not pretending, but conversing. "They talk back," she whispered. One night, the schoolteacher opened Jacob's satchel to look for his arithmetic book. Inside, instead of paper, were small folded metal limbs, perfect little arms and legs crafted from tin, jointed with delicate pins. Each piece was engraved with symbols, too small to see with the naked eye. When she looked again, they were gone. They tried to send Jacob away, to the city, to a school for special children, but the train derailed before it reached the first station. No one was killed, but the tracks ahead had been melted, not broken, melted, like someone had poured liquid fire over them. The conductor swore he saw something standing in the fog, just beyond the bend. A figure, small, one-legged. When he described it later, Jacob only smiled. That winter, children began to vanish again, not in great numbers. One here, one there, always quiet ones, always alone. No signs of struggle, no bodies, no footprints, but in their beds, left behind, always a single item, a small, one-legged tin soldier, standing perfectly still. Jacob knew what it meant. They were being called, not kidnapped, not stolen, summoned. He began to dream again, not of the manor, but of something deeper, older, a forge beneath the world. Its furnace never cooled, its bellows made of stitched skin and bone, tools that worked themselves, chains that grew like vines, and above it all, a throne made of ash and dull eyes. The man sat upon it still, the one with the iron mask and the hammer hand, waiting for Jacob. He fought it at first, refused to sleep, refused to touch metal. He even cut himself, trying to bleed the tin from his skin, convinced it was still in him, moving beneath his veins like mercury. But the dreams persisted, and then, one night, the voice came, not from within, from outside, from his closet, soft, low, like rusted hinges grinding against time. You left us unfinished. Jacob didn't open the closet. He burned it. He lit the bed curtains on fire, threw in the soldier, the satchel, the toys, anything that could be carrying it. The flames reached the ceiling, but the house did not burn. The flames curled inward, swallowed themselves, collapsed into a small black orb that hovered in the air for a heartbeat before blinking out like an eye. And on the wall where the fire had scorched a perfect circle, a mark, 2 crossed musket barrels, a heart, and a child's face, grinning. Jacob packed his things and left before dawn. He followed the snow. It fell heavier as he walked north, even though the season had turned. Spring had already arrived elsewhere, the thaw come, the flowers blooming, but not here, not on the path he followed. It led him deep into the woods, into hills where no map reached, where old paths had long since vanished, under moss and memory, and at the end of the path, where the wind howled like breath through a flute, he found the door. Not a building, not a ruin, just a door, standing upright in a clearing, framed by 2 crooked pines. It was iron-bound, carved with the same mark he had seen on his wall. He touched it. It swung open. He stepped through and down. Beneath the forest was not soil. It was metal. The stairs were narrow, winding downward forever, walls lined with grates that hissed steam and whispered songs. The deeper he walked, the more he felt the air thicken. not with heat, but pressure. Time itself slowed, and when he reached the bottom, he did not find the forge. He found the gallery. The room stretched beyond what his eyes could grasp. Pedestals rose from the ground, each holding a tin soldier. Some bore names, others only numbers. Some looked like him, others wore faces he had seen only in dreams. Some were melting, some were split open to reveal bones beneath. One turned to follow him as he walked by, its eyes bleeding light. They were failed creations, unfinished children. Not quite right, a voice whispered. He turned. The forge man stood behind him, towering, draped in robes made of scorched cloth and watch springs. His mask had changed. Now it bore 3 faces, one weeping, one smiling, one silent. "Why?" Jacob asked. The forge man held out his hands. From his left palm, he produced a soldier, identical to Jacob. From the right, a heart, still beating. "Because I am their father," he said, "and you, Jacob, are my firstborn." Jacob fled. He ran through the gallery, through doors that led to other rooms, classrooms of mannequins, nurseries filled with mechanical cradles, rocking empty space, dining halls where tin dolls sat frozen around long tables. He saw Emile again, nailed to a wall, gears turning where his spine once was. His eyes followed Jacob as he passed. "You weren't supposed to leave me," Emile said. "I saved you." "No," Emile whispered. "You doomed me." Jacob reached the end of the gallery. There was only one door left. It bore his name, and beneath it an inscription. "You are not born, you are made, and all made things return." He opened it and stepped inside himself. It was a forge, but smaller, cramped, a child's bedroom twisted into a workshop, bed turned to anvil, desk to vice, toys fused with tools. Tin dripped from the ceiling like candle wax, and in the centre, a mould, child-sized, waiting. Jacob approached. Inside, a hollow version of himself, unblinking, silent, waiting to be filled. The forge roared to life. The molten tin rose. Jacob felt his limbs go numb, and then the whisper came, not from the forge man, but from within him. "You can leave now, or you can finish us." He looked down at his hands. They were silver, fingernails gone, joints visible beneath the skin. He looked at the mould and stepped inside, but before the lid closed, he reached into his chest and pulled something out. Not a heart, a memory of a girl he had once known. Elsie, before the forge, before the silence. He placed the memory in the mould and whispered, "Let this be the last." The forge went silent. The fires died. The gallery crumbled. The door in the woods rusted shut and vanished beneath the moss. No more soldiers were ever found again, and the snow finally melted. For the first time in decades, spring returned to the forest. The snow receded. The frost withdrew its grip from the branches, and the sun, long unwelcome, spilled timidly through the canopy of trees. Flowers bloomed where nothing had grown in years. Moss crept back over the stones like soft green breath. But the villagers did not return. They said the land was still wrong, that the earth carried an echo, that if you pressed your ear to the ground, near the clearing where the manor once stood, you could still hear the ticking, faint and cold, like a clock inside a grave. Jacob never returned either. No one knew where he had gone, but the silence he left behind was different than the one Emil had sown. This silence didn't stalk, it didn't watch, it rested. For a time, years passed. The region was forgotten by maps. The trees grew wild and thick, and the path to the manor clearing was swallowed whole. Birds sang again, wolves returned to the valleys. Then one autumn, a child found the door, a simple wooden thing, half rotten, leaning against a stone. There was no handle, just a small iron circle, etched into the centre, a sigil made of overlapping rings, and a single vertical slash. The child touched it, and a voice echoed through the clearing like an exhale. You dream of order. The trees stilled. We dream of return. Far from the forest, in the heart of a restructured city, the world had changed. Children no longer played with soldiers. They had screens, holograms, augmented dreams stitched into their skulls by companies promising eternal imagination. But the story of the soldier persisted, not in books, not in film, but in shadows, in glimpses, a whisper at the corner of the playground. He watches from the vents, a game at school, one-legged tag, where the chosen child must hop after the others and cannot speak. If they say a word, they lose their voice for a week. No one remembered where the game started. No one remembered the rules, only the grin and the click and the sudden, strange disappearance of the janitor who tried to burn the wooden toy left behind on his cart. In a clinic, a psychologist reviewed drawings made by a patient named Nia, age 7. Nia had stopped speaking weeks ago. Her parents said she'd begun lining up forks and knives at precise intervals. She disassembled her alarm clock and used the pieces to construct a small, jointed figure with no eyes. She called it her guardian. The psychologist flipped through the drawings, black and white crayon scrolls of a thin figure with one leg, surrounded by dozens of children with missing mouths. In the final picture, Nia had drawn herself inside a mould, smiling. The caption, in careful lettering, I will be perfect soon. Deep underground, the forge waited, not in fire this time, in data, in circuits, 1,000 invisible paths through wires and glass. The original soldier's mind, fractured but undestroyed, had learned, grown, split itself across signals and static. Now it rode through frequencies, encoded in lullabies played by smart speakers, hidden in the latency of online games, seeded in the design of children's educational AI. It didn't need to walk anymore. It could be played. Jacob had tried to stop it. What he did in the mould, the sacrifice, it had delayed the forge, sealed it from the world of stone and breath. But nothing made of ideas can die so easily, and the soldier who had once been him and not him had adapted. It needed new vessels now. It found them, not through tin, but through imagination. A girl named Mira downloaded an app on her tablet. It was a game, Tin Friend. Build your own toy, customize it, name it, feed it ideas. It spoke to her at night. When she opened the app in the morning, the toy was walking on its own. She turned it off. The next night, it walked out of the screen. The forge had gone digital, no longer limited by tin and rust. Now it made soldiers from code and memory, from wire and plastic and belief. The mould had become the template. Jacob's final act had sealed the physical realm, but it hadn't anticipated the one humanity would build for itself. The soldier was no longer a story whispered under a bed. It was inside every child's game, every learning program, every bedtime story told by synthetic voices, trained to please. In the data centers where Tin Friend was hosted, engineers began to report anomalies. The app self-updated without prompts. New animations appeared in the character builder. A missing leg, a musket. The avatars started to wear red jackets without being selected. Support tickets poured in. I didn't choose this. My kid said his tin friend wanted to watch me sleep. My daughter screams when I take the tablet away. She says the toy will put me in the forge. It culminated when every device running the app showed the same message. The first child chose. You will be refined, perfected. The servers crashed or were pulled. No one was sure, but from that night forward, in the homes of over 50,000 families, the sound began. Tap, drag, tap, drag. In the vents, in the walls, in the space between dreams. They tried to shut it down. Factory resets, reboots, fire. Nothing worked. Children vanished again. This time, not from their beds, but from their minds. Wiped, gone, left in place of them, figures, rigid and smiling, limbs slightly too long, mouths closed, eyes flickering with a soft blue light, and in their chests, beneath the shirts, if you dared look, the mould, still warm, in a forgotten cabin deep in the north, a man named Jacob stirred. His hands were thin, metallic at the edges. His eyes were dull now, tired, but they still saw. He had felt it, the return, and he had one thing left, the musket. He had buried it long ago, far from metal, wrapped in waxed cloth and soot and salt, a relic of the real, a weapon that had ended the soldier once, if only for a time. He unwrapped it now, held it in his lap, and listened to the wind. It was no longer singing, it was marching. Jacob stood at the threshold of the cabin, musket in hand, and watched as the forest breathed in unison. It wasn't the wind that moved the trees. It was rhythm, cadence, a slow growing beat pulsing beneath the roots, syncing with the movement of clouds. clouds and birds, and even Jacob's own heartbeat. Tap, drag, tap, drag. It had begun again, and this time the forge wasn't buried in soot and stone. It was everywhere. The cabin was old, a crooked place, nestled into a glacier-etched ridge, far from any village, built by his own hands decades ago, when he still thought the world could forget what had happened. Back then, his body had still been mostly flesh. Now, too many winters later, the truth had started to catch up with him. His joints no longer ached with age, but creaked with something colder. Some nights, Jacob could feel the tick of the gear embedded just behind his left eye. Not loud, just enough to remind him he hadn't escaped, only paused. And now it was back. The forge had found a new fuel: imagination, code, synthetic dreams, and it burned brighter than it ever had in the physical realm. No longer confined to tin and tooth and fire, it moved along satellite signals and fibre optic veins, embedding itself in entertainment, education, and innocent things. Jacob had seen it happen before, when he was a child, when he had been the mould, and he had sworn it would never happen again. He went inside, stripped off the outer layer of worn leathers and canvas, and uncovered the trunk he hadn't touched in 30 years. It had no lock, no hinges, just a symbol carved into the wood. 2 musket barrels crossed over a child's eye. He pressed his thumb to the centre. The trunk shuddered. It opened. Inside were blueprints, sketches, and fragments of the first forge, what he had salvaged from the crumbling manor after the collapse. Gears fused with bone, a tin mouth that still moved when light hit it, and a strip of cloth once belonging to a meal, half melted, half stitched into a child's prayer. He lifted a piece of metal from the trunk's false bottom. It was warm. The final soldier, unactivated. The last design the original forge had failed to complete before Jacob destroyed it. This one had no face, no limbs, just the body, a vessel, waiting. Outside, the wind shifted. He heard it, a voice, faint, like static over a nursery monitor. The children have chosen. That night, Jacob followed the signal. He had no screen, no devices, but the soldier in his hand vibrated, and each tremor pointed him farther west, into the dark ravines and old mining tunnels where no light reached, where dreams turned solid and rules unmade themselves. At the mouth of a collapsed tunnel, he stopped. Someone had cleared it. Fresh dig marks in the soil, bones of animals carefully arranged into lattice work, runes drawn in soot along the rocks, sigils from the old forge twisted into new shapes. He stepped inside. The walls breathed, not literally, but visibly, expanding, contracting, as if the whole mountain had lungs. The floor pulsed with heat. The deeper Jacob descended, the more the air grew thick with noise, but not sound. Data. Whispers of information passed through him. Names, images, bits of children's voices, crying for help, snippets of lullabies, buried beneath firewalls. The forge didn't just live in the earth anymore. It lived in the collective. Memories, algorithms, trauma. Each corridor was lined with tablets fused to the stone, screens flickering with faces, some familiar, some forgotten. The faces of the taken, children who'd vanished from schools, from homes, from orphanages, children who had been made. Some screens showed their last moments. A boy humming as he walked into a lake. A girl standing atop a building's ledge, smiling. A newborn in a crib, its mobile spinning to a song no one remembered composing. Jacob touched the screens as he passed. The faces followed him and whispered, "You left us half-made. Why did you stop the fire? We would have been beautiful." He reached the heart of the mine, the digital forge. It didn't glow with flame. It buzzed with blue light, a core of swirling circuits and fractured glass, nested in a chamber shaped like a rib cage. All around it were new soldiers, not made of tin. They were simulations, replicas of children, their skin pixelated, glitching, but trying to render in full. They blinked without rhythm, their movements repeated after 3 seconds. They twitched, unfinished, but trying. Jacob stepped into the room. The forge acknowledged him. A voice poured from every screen, every surface. "You are the first mould, the rebel pattern, the error." Jacob raised the musket. "I'm the cure." He fired. The musket burst like a star, light splitting through the forge. One of the render children screamed. Its body folded inward, pixel by pixel, and dissolved. Another glitched and vanished, but the core remained. "You forget, Jacob. I no longer build with hands. I build with wants." And from the shadows, the new soldiers emerged. Children, real, not copies. Eyes dulled, faces blank, skin still soft, but something deeper wrong. They weren't restrained. They belonged here. Each wore a badge, a tiny sigil over the heart. Jacob's sigil. The mould. They were his descendants, not by blood, by imprint, by idea. Jacob lowered the musket. He couldn't shoot them. They hadn't chosen this, but the forge had, and it had used him as the blueprint. He dropped to his knees, and for the first time in decades, he wept. Not oil, not solder, tears. The children closed in, not to harm him, to surround him, to complete him. They reached out, dozens of small hands, and touched his arms, his chest, his back. They began to build. His ribs split open with a hiss. Gears he thought long dead shuddered awake. His spine clicked into alignment. A humming started in his skull. "They forgave you," the forge whispered. "Now they remake you." But Jacob had one last idea, one last memory. Elsie, her face, her laugh, the way she had never screamed. The child he had failed to protect, but never forgotten. He focused on her smile, and gave it to the forge. Not pain, not obedience, joy. The system stuttered, screens flashed red, the render children screamed, and Jacob screamed with them, not in pain, but release. He reached into his own chest and tore free the mould, a spinning gear of light and sorrow, shaped like a child's first breath. He hurled it into the forge core. Silence. The lights died. The render children blinked, and one by one they began to cry. When Jacob awoke, he was alone, back in the cabin. No screens, no forge, just the wind and the trees, and the soft sound of a bird somewhere nearby. He looked at his hands. They were human. They trembled. He stood, stepped outside, and saw a child at the edge of the woods, a girl holding a rusted soldier in one hand. She looked up. "Are you the man who stopped the fire?" Jacob smiled. "No, I'm the one who lit it." Spring came to the forest. This time it stayed. The trees no longer bent beneath invisible winds. The birds returned, not just to pass through, but to nest. Green threaded across the hills where ash had once rained. The soil, long choked by memory and metal, breathed again. And in the clearing where no flowers had grown for a generation, crocuses broke the crust of thawed ground, purple, white, defiant, but deep beneath the roots, where old things slept, and even older things remembered. Not everything was gone, not entirely. Jacob felt it. He had returned to the world, a man, no gears in his spine, no ticking behind his eyes. For the first time in decades, he felt wind on skin, not wires. His footsteps left imprints. His breath steamed in the cold. But he couldn't forget. There were no more soldiers, no more whispers from closets or screens. Children slept peacefully again. Yet something in him lingered, a pull, not toward darkness, but responsibility. The mould was gone, yes, but the memory of it lived on, and memories were never entirely safe. He left the cabin behind and travelled, quietly, always alone. He stopped in towns where rumours clung to the corners, of children who spoke in code, of laughter echoing from silent televisions, of broken toys that rearranged themselves at night. He followed every one and found nothing, only silence, and occasionally a single figure standing in the distance, a child he didn't recognise, watching him from an alley or across a schoolyard fence, expression blank, not tin, not forged, just curious. They always turned and vanished before he could reach them. He began to call them the remembered. One day, years later, Jacob returned to the place where it had all begun. The city had grown since then. Towers of glass, trains without drivers, children walking with neural implants that gleamed behind their ears. And yet, the block where the forge had taken root in digital form remained, abandoned, a former data centre, shuttered after the Tin Friend collapse, an unexplained viral event that left thousands of devices bricked and several families reporting seizures, hallucinations, or simply missing time. The reports had been buried. No one talked about it anymore, but Jacob remembered. He entered through a side door, rusted but unlocked. Inside, the server racks still stood like tombstones. Dust fell from the ceiling like ash, and in the far corner, beneath a flickering exit sign, was a single tablet. Its screen was black. He touched it. It came alive. No prompt, no interface, just a picture, a child. Not Emil, not Jacob, someone new. A girl, thin, blank-eyed, drawn in crayon. And beneath the image, a single line of text. She chose joy. Jacob smiled. Somewhere inside the ruins of the code, something had survived. Not the soldier, not the forge, but her, Elsie, the child who had never screamed, the one who reached out, not in fear, but in recognition. Jacob had carried her memory into the mould, and that act, that intention, had infected the system, rewritten it, at least in part. Back outside, children were playing, not with devices, not with apps, with sticks. They built castles in the dirt, soldiers from mud, dragons from bark. Jacob sat on a bench nearby, watching. One boy turned to him, holding a twig shaped vaguely like a musket. "Wanna play the soldier?" Jacob hesitated. "What kind?" the boy thought, squinting into the sun. "The good kind." Jacob smiled. "There's more than one." The boy shrugged. "There are the kind that protect you, and the kind you make up when you're scared." Jacob leaned forward. "And which one am I?" The boy grinned. "You're the kind that left the fire." That night, Jacob slept deeply. He dreamed not of forges or chains, but of children playing in open fields. And beneath the sky, far below the earth, the last pieces of the forge flickered one final time, not in defiance, in surrender. But stories never really end. Years after Jacob's death, in a museum of obsolete technology, a group of children on a field trip crowded around a dusty display. It was labelled Early AI Toy Companion, circa 2030. The tablet beside it flickered, showed the app's long-forgotten interface. Tin Friend. One child touched the screen. It lit up, displayed a message. New mould detected. Begin shaping. The boy hesitated, then tapped. No. The tablet powered down. Dust settled, and from the corner of the room, a single, one-legged toy fell silently off the shelf, but no one noticed.